Hello, old school comic book reviews. Okay, this one's going to be a little bit different. This is kind of a response to a video that was posted by Blows Himself Up Dude. Blows Himself Up Dude is a pretty popular YouTuber, and he put up a video. Actually, there was a response by Ziploc Gory as well, but the initial video was about violence in comics, and it wasn't so much violence in comics, but the idea of fights in superhero comics, some of the points that he pointed out were, how it starts off as being this thing to entertain kids, to becoming this sort of adolescent power fantasy, to evolving to this thing where sometimes the fights represent something bigger than fights, represent warring ideologies and things like that. And I thought his clip was pretty interesting and pretty provocative, and I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents. I think, first of all, he's pretty much right as far as like superhero comics being adolescent power fantasies. I just think that's undeniable. I'm not saying that as something that's a bad thing necessarily, but it's there. It's there in superhero comics. It's there in certain television shows. It's there in certain genres of music. It's there in a lot of movies and things. And just the idea that, wouldn't it be cool if I could strike out against this person that's making me mad? Wouldn't it be cool if I could not only fight this person that's making me mad and win, I could also get the beautiful girl. You know what I mean? I think that's just prevalent in our society, in our pop culture and things like that. And I think it pushes certain emotional buttons, certain even primal buttons that's there in everybody, black, white, man, even women. You grow up like that. I mean, if you're a boy, girl, or whatever, especially when you're a child, it's something that's kind of, you're kind of socialized out of that. You realize you can't do that, if you don't have a parent or whatever telling you, no, you can't just hit somebody because you're mad, or you just can't take something because you want it. If you don't have parents that are teaching you that, then, well enough, some other kid is going to teach you that, and you're going to get the excuse me, you're gonna learn it the hard way. But anyway, I think that's there in everybody, and I think that's why people like fiction and art and entertainment that provides them that catharsis, and you can get it anyway. You get it, like I said, superhero movies, action movies, certain types of music, just going out dancing on a Saturday night, you know, is cathartic for some people, and it pushes that button. You're mad at your boss. You're mad at your wife or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. Um, and that's a way to feel that release. In a socially acceptable and fun way. And you get that in superhero comics. You probably get a more crystallized version of it because here you are. You have men and women. They're not just men and women. They're physically fit. Matter of fact, they're more fit than any person can actually be. They're exaggeratedly hyper masculine and hyper feminine, and out there having these very uh, physical conflicts and things like that. I mean, you can't go back to the old days when comics had to be safe for kids and things like that. And a lot of times, there were, you had superhero comics that really weren't about, the fights or whatever. The conflict is, the superhero getting involved in some sort of wacky hijinks or something, and the resolution is, whatever, you know, Superman finding out, okay, it's you, Lefty Hooligan. You're the one who's selling the communists the secret plans to let the Martians come in while you're dressed as a cowboy. Have at you, And at the end of the story, it's just that one, punch to the chin or whatever, and that's the end of the story. Of course, as time went by, you got to have more exaggerated characters and situations, more crazy science fiction-y things, and you got to do them in such a way that it's the Hulk fighting a thing, but because both of these characters aren't real, they get to slam at each other and punch each other and knock down buildings and knock down, complete city blocks and things like that. And and it's just fun and it's exciting and so on and so forth. And occasionally you get some pathos thrown in there as well. But very much, yeah, kids find that stuff exciting. But you know what? You go see a movie like I don't know, whatever, uh, The Matrix, The Expendables, whatever. Those movies are about whatever else they're supposedly about. They're really about looking cool and kicking ass. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying it's the same thing done in a slightly different form. Um, I think that's why even a character like old school Hulk, I mean, Silver Age Hulk, 70s Hulk, Me Smash, I think that's why that character appealed to so many people, because the Hulk, and this will get into the next point, represented, that he represented that feeling, that primal anger, that everybody feels, that childhood, rage even. The idea the Hulk wasn't out there, defending the border or anything like that. The Hulk just wanted to be left alone. People kept messing with him, and he was able to strike back. He was able to strike back in a big, massive way. Nobody could beat the Hulk, and that's that thing you feel or wish you could do when you're a younger person. And like I said, even when you're an older person, sometimes when you're an older person, that rage might be a little bit more, focused. When you're a younger person, you're mad at everything that keeps you down. You're mad at your parents, you're mad at the cops, you're mad at the outside world, you're mad at everybody you know. Not necessarily that you're always mad at them, but it feels like the whole world is on your shoulders. Um, and the Hulk was somebody who was able to fight back against the whole world. Who was his friends in the Marvel Universe? It wasn't the straight-laced superheroes. It wasn't the Avengers or the Fantastic Four. Those characters represented authority and mainstream society. His friends were like the misfit heroes, Doctor Strange and Nighthawk and Valkyrie and Hellcat and these people who had no place else to go. Um, so I mean, I think that's one thing. Another thing that blows himself up to touched on. I really like that he brought up Frank Miller. I'm a Frank Miller fan. I will say he's done one or two things that I think really weren't that great, but for the most part, I think his stuff holds up. I think his old stuff holds up, and matter of fact, I think for whatever reason, people kind of forget about some of the groundbreaking stuff that he did back in the 80s, but we'll get that in a moment. But he brought up the whole idea that when Frank does, and a lot of times in his work, Frank uses characters and uses these characters as symbols. And I think, like I said, I think he was spot on. He was point on when he brought up that idea. Um, Frank has said himself, I like characters that symbolize these certain things. I'm not trying to do realism. I'm trying to do something that's larger than life. You can look at even something like The Dark Knight Returns, and sometimes people talk about it, sometimes people don't. But there's the big Superman Batman fight where there's a fight there that, yeah, it's about Superman fighting Batman, but it's about so much more. I mean, Superman represents certain ideas, Batman represents certain ideas. You could look at that and say that, Superman represents, rule of law versus Batman representing the spirit of justice, or Superman represents encroaching government control, while Batman represents certain libertarian ideas. Superman represents the rules versus Batman representing justice. It's very. I mean, it's very much a symbolic fight. You know what I mean? And what's good about it is you can look at it in a very varied, you can look at it various different ways and project different ideas onto those characters, and it still works. It works as a literal thing. It works as a metaphorical thing. Um, But I think that, oh well, just another thing, another one of my favorite Frank Miller stories, and I think another YouTuber named Real Manos did a video about this particular story, but it was a Daredevil story called well, it was issue 191 called Roulette, and it's the infamous story where Daredevil goes into the hospital and he plays Russian roulette with Bullseye, who's paralyzed and he's bandaged up and so on and so forth. And I'm gonna have to give some of it away to just to talk about what we're talking about. Basically, the story has to do with Daredevil tells Bullseye that while he's doing the Russian roulette thing, this story about that happened to him a few days ago. Basically, Matt Murdock is called in to defend this one guy who may or may not be this corrupt politician or whatever. Goes to the guy's house to talk to him. Finds out he meets his son. The boy is this very lonely kid. He doesn't appear to have any friends. But he has a very active fantasy life, and his biggest fantasy is watching old tapes of Daredevil. Daredevil's his favorite hero. Daredevil is the guy he lives for. Daredevil was the greatest, As the story goes on, we find out, the boy may or may not be physically abused, or, his father's obviously domineering and overbearing and whatnot, and the boy is very unhappy, and at one point, Matt goes to see him in his Daredevil suit, and he's like, hey, Chucky, me and you, we're going to go have some fun, all right? And the boy says to him something, and here we get to the crux of it. He's like, wow, you're the greatest hero ever, I love you so much. You can do whatever you want. And when somebody gets in your way, you give it to them. Pow! And Matt's a little like, oh, that's why he looks up to me. And, so on and so forth. This happens, that happens. At one point, well, just to get some stuff that goes on in the story. At one point, Chucky snaps. He takes a gun to school and shoots some of his classmates, and Daredevil has to deal with the fact that here's this boy who was unstable, and he went out and committed this tragic act, and it doesn't go real easy one way or the other way of why he did it. Nobody really knows because the boy was obviously disturbed. But Daredevil has to look at the fact he says out loud, he says, I have to question myself now. I have to question, what am I doing? Running around in tights doing this thing. Am I showing people that crime doesn't pay? Am I showing people that, don't give up hope? The cavalry is on its way? Or am I showing people that, hey, you can get what you want if you're quick and tough and fast enough and think with your fists, And that was a very provocative story because it kind of really hinted on things that people are always talking about, violence in the media and so on and so forth, and conflict resolution and blah, 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 blah. But I think it did in a very intelligent way, and I think it was good for Frank to do this in a superhero comic. But going back to the idea that, superhero fights can sometimes symbolize something greater, I think that does happen, but I think it's been there from the beginning, You look at the first issue of, Captain America. Here's a comic book that came out before America was officially involved in World War II. On the cover, you've got, Captain America, super soldier. He's dressed up in a suit patterned after the American flag, and he's like, hitting Hitler in the face, you know what I mean? You don't get more, symbolic or metaphorical than that. Well, not metaphorical, but you don't get more symbolic than that. It's right there, you know what I mean? Captain America he's the super soldier that represents, truth, justice, in the American way. He's the guy that represents, freedom and democracy versus, fascism and every other ism out there, Who's his villain, His villain is the Red Skull, a guy whose face is death, Before it was a mask, now I think it's his regular face. I don't know. But anyway, the way he looks, he's got the face of death, He's got a swastika on his jumpsuit. I remember reading a reprint of the old Stan Lee Jack Kirby origin of the Red Skull, and while the Red Skull's telling his story, he doesn't give his real name at that point, and you don't really get a clear shot of his face, His face is always obscured for one reason or the other, And I think they were, putting across the idea that if Captain America represents everything good about the American spirit, everything good about, mankind. The skull represented everything bad. He wasn't just evil. He was all evil. He wasn't just an individual doing the bad things. He was all bad men. You know what I mean? Um, and I think you had that during the Silver Age and Bronze Age. Stan Lee's gone on record as saying that when he created Iron Man, he purposely wanted a hero that was a businessman. Not just that he was rich, not that he was a millionaire. He was a businessman. He was a capitalist. And all the, sure, they threw in some Howard Hughes and they threw in some Cary Grant on top of that, to make it more glamorous and everything. But that's who that character was. He sold weapons to the government. He made weapons for the army, and that's a good thing. The army was protecting us from, foreign invaders and whatnot. All the villains for those first few years, everybody was a communist or somebody who was being fooled by the communists. So every fight was, a fight of capitalism versus communism, democracy versus, socialist dictatorship, you know what I mean? That's what every comic was about. Almost every comic was about. That's what every fight symbolized, Even something, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, even somebody like the Mandarin. The Mandarin wasn't necessarily a communist, but he's Chinese, and he looks like Fu Manchu. And at that time, Mao Zedong running China. So it was almost like, he was obviously a bad guy, but it was almost like he was even more of a bad guy by, association, He's not just a bad guy, he's a Chinese bad guy. You know what they have in Chinese? More communist. You got, okay, let's get to this. You got the whole idea of, 80s X-Men, how 80s X-Men, were kind of metaphors for, fringe groups or disenfranchised groups or maybe sort of minorities and blah, 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 blah. And, the idea that these characters were outcasts and misfits from mainstream society, but at the same time they were trying to be superheroes and show that, hey, we can be superheroes just like those other, superheroes who were accepted by the dominant culture and so on and so forth, One weird thing really quickly. I was actually going to do another tape on this. I might not. But just to throw it out because we're talking about this, the X-Men as metaphors for minorities or fringe groups, that's really an 80s thing. If you buy those 60s comics, maybe there are a handful of times. That's not really what that comic book is about. It's really about, first class X-Men. They were kind of a second rate group who were fighting Count Nefaria and Plant Man and Porcupine Man and Eel Man. Magneto, and this is the real thing that bugs me, is not a stand-in for Malcolm X. He just isn't. It just doesn't work. I implore anybody, just please read some of those old X-Men comics, then go read the autobiography of Malcolm X. Okay, I get why people say that, but it just doesn't work. I mean, people say that more based on the temperament of those characters, but it just doesn't work. Okay, Malcolm X, sure, he was a two-bit thug. He did this, he did that, or whatever. Went to jail, came back, converted, blah 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 blah. After he converted, you could say all that, no, by any means necessary, and blah 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 blah. But Malcolm X did not break the law after that. He was very, chaste. Well, he wasn't chaste. He was chaste until he got married. He didn't attack other Negroes or try to kill other black folks who disagreed with him. Okay, it's not like Magneto, where Magneto would actually try to kill the X-Men. There's a pretty funny story or a pretty funny line from, and I want to say it was like X-Men 150 or whatever. Just jumping to the end, the X-Men defeat Magneto's plan, and Magneto turns to him and he's like, "You again? Why do you keep stopping me? Don't you see I want peace for our people?" And Cyclops or somebody on the team says something like, "Don't give me that crap. Your ideal of peace is mutants ruling all over the humans and you ruling over the mutants." And Magneto's like, "Well, yes. Is that so bad?" I'm just saying that doesn't work, especially if you want to compare Magneto to like black radicals of that time. I mean, look into somebody like Eldridge Cleaver or Bobby Seals or somebody like that who were way more angry and way more aggressive and way more let's go have a revolution than Malcolm X was. That's all I want to say. Magneto was not Malcolm X. Okay. Anyway, back to fights. But yeah, the idea that these fights were, symbolize other things have always been around. I would even say, there was this one other example I wanted to bring up of the Green Lantern, Green Arrow. I can't remember the exact number of the issue, but it was the one where where they're on the Indian reservation and some evil businessmen or some evil loggers wanted to take over the land or whatever. Anyway, about 3/4 through the story, this happens, that happens, blah 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 blah. And Green Arrow was trying to get the people riled up or whatever, and Hal Jordan comes in. He's like, stop this, okay? See this guy? This is Congressman so-and-so, and we're going to investigate what's going on here, And Green Arrow is like, oh, yeah, he just wants you to go home and sit on your hands. I tell you, we gotta take it downtown and, make our voices heard or whatever. And at this point, Hal's had enough of Ollie's crap, and he's like, there you go with your shoot your mouth off. You don't know what the hell you're talking about, you self-righteous prick, you. And then, and Ollie's like, okay, you want to go? Let's go. Whatever. He doesn't say that, but they, at this point, get into a fist fight. Hal takes off his ring, Ollie drops his arrows, and they get into a big fist fight, and, they, basically, the fight ends with, I don't know, somebody falling in the river, and then one of the logs get loose and knocks them both out, and somebody has to jump in the river and save them. My point being, at this point, yeah, it's a fight between between Ollie and Hal, but it's also a fight between, the conservative point of view versus the more liberal point of view, which was kind of, reflective of some of the things that was going on in the country at that time. So I think that whole idea of, characters and fights that symbolize things other than just what they are, I think it's always been there. I think back in the past, sometimes they had to soft sell it. Sometimes it was there, even though I would say it was implicitly there, even if it wasn't, said, out loud. If Reed Richards and the rest of the Fantastic Four fight, the Red Ghost and his super monkeys, when Reed triumphs, yeah, it's a triumph for Reed Richards, but implicitly, it's a triumph of, American know-how and moxie over, Soviet craftiness, and I think that was implied a bit, and I think you kind of got it. Maybe you kind of didn't got it, but it was kind of there, And I also think you saw that a lot more or done in a different way, I should say, because at the time there were lots of restrictions in the 60s, 70s, 80s about what you could and could not do in a mainstream superhero comic. There was the whole idea of, well, these are heroes and there should be some sort of moral going on. So I think people were, that stuff was kind of implied a lot of times. I think nowadays, as the audience has shifted a little bit and, storytelling and whatnot's gotten a little bit more sophisticated, you'll get those things, you'll get those same sorts of ideas and fights and conflicts laid out that way, sometimes in a more ambiguous way or more nuanced way, like Blows Himself Up dude said. You get characters, and this might be a good thing, might be a bad thing, we could argue that back and forth, where the characters aren't necessarily heroes. Sometimes the characters are anti-heroes, or the characters are, just unsure of themselves. But there's still the idea of, I'm in a gray space, but you're definitely in an evil space. And I think that's the difference between now and 20 years ago versus 40 years ago. Where you have now a character like Moon Knight, who back in 1980 was, originally a guy who just had three different secret identities, versus now he's a guy who's mentally unstable. And the protagonist is somebody who's mentally unstable, but he's trying to redeem himself, and his fights, take on that aspect of I must, fight these other people who are even more twisted than I am, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I think, of course, from here you go into the obvious thing. Of course, you have these fights that are meaningful. Then you have hacked out fights that are just there because somebody decides, well, it's a superhero comic and we have to have a fight, versus other things where people just have, lowest common denominator, exploitive stuff in there, just because they want to make money and they think all of us in the audience are stupid. Mark Millar, I'm looking at you. But whatever. I think there's room for all of that. You know what I mean? Anyway, that's my opinion. I know I've kind of rambled on for a long time. Let me know what you think. Thanks, and you have a good one.